Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going on a deep dive into a really fascinating online community. Um, they're dedicated to keeping the Shanghainese dialect alive.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So, a lot of people might think, oh, Shanghainese, isn't that just like a type of Mandarin?
Right, right.
But
Yeah, it's actually a whole separate thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of a whole other branch of the Chinese language family called Wu Chinese.
Exactly.
And it's spoken by millions of people.
Millions, yeah.
And it has a rich history all its own.
It really does. And unfortunately, just like a lot of other languages around the world, Shanghainese is facing some pretty serious threats of just disappearing.
Yeah, fading away.
Yeah.
And that's why what this group is doing is so important. They're not just, preserving these old recordings or things like that.
Right.
They're actually creating new content.
Yeah, vibrant new content.
All in Shanghain.
All in Shanghainese.
Yeah.
Just incredible.
And they call themselves the Wu Language Podcast, or Wu Bouquet, if you want to,
If you want to show off a little.
Yeah, show off a little.
Yeah.
But what's really amazing to me is that this isn't just like a local thing in Shanghai. This is a global community.
It is.
We're talking like people in Canada, Australia, the U.S., Europe, Japan.
all over the place.
And all over Greater China as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah, all united by this, love for this dialect.
What gets me is how they're bridging this massive geographical gap by using, the internet.
Right.
And it really shows the power of these online platforms to bring people together around shared passions, no matter how niche they may seem.
You know what? I had that same thought at first too, like niche.
Yeah.
But the more I learned about their work, the more I realized how universal their story really is.
Yeah.
So before we get into that, I'm really curious about what kinds of stuff this group is actually working on.
Okay, so they got started about 3 years ago, and at first they were mainly focused on modern Shanghainese literature.
Okay.
And they did some really cool projects, like they tackled Blossoms Shanghai,
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
a really immersive novel
Yeah.
that really captures the energy of modern Shanghai.
Yeah.
Then there's the stories in Pudong,
Okay.
which kind of takes listeners back in time to the days before Pudong became this major financial hub.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they even did Tong Hiali,
Okay.
which is a really humorous look at life in Shanghai in the 1960s.
So it's a real mix.
Yeah.
It's like a whole audio library of what it's like to live in Shanghai.
Exactly.
But through this specific lens of using this unique dialect.
Right, like they're building a time capsule, but instead of burying it, they're sharing it with everyone.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And they didn't just limit themselves to just purely Shanghainese works. They also experimented with Fortress Besieged,
It did.
which is a really well-known Chinese novel. Yeah, and it shows how willing they are to, branch out.
Yeah, and bring a different kind of literature to this world of Shanghainese.
Okay, but then they took a turn to something really ambitious.
Oh, yeah.
They decided to tackle The Sing-Song Girls of Shanghai,
Mm-hmm.
this 19th century novel that's written entirely in the Wu dialect. So tell me, what makes this book so special?
Well, okay, so The Sing-Song Girls of Shanghai is considered a masterpiece of Wu literature for a few reasons. First of all, it gives you this incredible glimpse into the social life
Oh, wow.
and the courtesan culture of late Qing Dynasty Shanghai,
Oh, wow.
which was a period of just incredible change and turmoil in China.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, being written entirely in the Wu dialect makes it this really unique linguistic artifact. It's like stepping back in time and hearing the language as it was actually spoken
Wow.
back then.
That's incredible.
And you mentioned Eileen Chang,
Yeah.
the famous Chinese-American author. She actually translated it later on. So yeah, it seems like they didn't choose this novel just because it was a challenge, but
Yeah.
because it's actually a really important piece of
Yeah,
literary and cultural history.
absolutely.
And it shows just how dedicated they are, not just to preserving Shanghainese, but to highlighting how rich and powerful it can be as a language for literature.
Yeah.
But this brings up a really interesting question. How do you make a 19th century novel written entirely in a dialect accessible to a global audience?
Right.
When most people listening
Yeah.
probably don't speak any Shanghainese.
Right.
Well, they came up with a pretty clever solution.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me, how are they bridging that language gap?
Okay, so they decided to use this really interesting blend.
Okay.
They use Shanghainese for all the dialogue,
Okay.
and then they use Mandarin for the narration.
Oh, that's really smart.
Yeah.
Because that way,
So that way,
if you understand Mandarin, you can still follow along.
Exactly.
So that's how-
You can understand the plot and
Yeah.
everything that's going on.
Right. But you also get to hear
Well, you still get that
the beauty.
the beauty and the authenticity of the Shanghainese
Yes,
in
yes.
the dialogue.
It's like this built-in language immersion course.
It is.
You're getting a little taste of Shanghainese.
Yeah.
And it's still accessible.
And it's really accessible.
It's a really good balance.
Yeah, it shows how they're balancing that preservation with
Yeah.
accessibility.
And they're really dedicated to being authentic.
They are. They aim for 99% faithfulness to the original texts,
Wow.
which is amazing.
That's incredible.
They're really making sure they capture all the nuances of the language
Yep.
and the spirit of the original work.
So it's clear they're passionate about the content itself,
Oh, for sure.
but they're also really savvy about how they get it out into the world.
They are. Yeah.
They're not just sticking to one platform.
Right. They don't just do one thing.
Yeah, they started with a lot of different social media platforms, but then they also expanded to things like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts,
They did. They went all over,
all over the place,
Yeah.
reaching a global audience.
trying to get to as many people as possible.
They even have their own website
They do. whatyobook.com.
where you can stream their content directly.
It's very convenient.
Yeah, so it's like
Yeah.
they're using every tool at their disposal
Yeah.
to reach anyone,
Anyone who's interested.
anywhere in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's one choice they made that really stood out to me, and that's that they started using a Chinese podcasting app called Xiao Yuzu.
Oh, yes.
What's the significance of that?
Okay, so that's really interesting because by using Xiao Yuzu, they're specifically trying to reach a Chinese audience,
Right.
many of whom might have grown up speaking Mandarin,
Right.
but have kind of lost touch with their Shanghainese heritage.
Right.
So it's a sign that they're not just preserving the language, they're trying to actively revitalize it
Yeah.
within China itself.
That's so cool. It's like they're reaching out to people who may have forgotten
Right.
about the beauty.
About this beautiful
That's their own
part of their heritage.
linguistic heritage.
Exactly.
It's really cool. I'm really impressed by their foresight and commitment to engaging with a new generation.
Yeah, me too. It really shows how they understand that cultural preservation isn't just about archiving the past.
Yeah.
It's about making it relevant for today.
Yeah, exactly.
But they ran into a pretty big challenge along the way.
Oh, no. What was that?
So they actually lost some of their recordings
Oh, no.
for the stories in Pudong
Oh, no.
because of storage issues.
Oh, man. That's like
It's like a nightmare.
a nightmare for any podcaster.
It is, yeah.
Did you have to scrap the whole project?
No, not at all. They're actually planning to re-record
Oh, wow.
the missing parts.
That's dedication.
Yeah.
They could have just moved on,
Yeah.
but they're committed.
They're committed to the project.
Yeah, even with the setbacks.
Absolutely.
That's really cool.
And they're always looking for ways to make the content more accessible. Listening to a language you're not familiar with can be hard.
Yeah.
So they started incorporating visual aids,
Oh, cool.
like text alongside their audio clip.
Oh, like subtitles.
Yeah, exactly, like subtitled.
But specifically designed to help you understand the Shanghainese.
Yes, exactly.
That's a bit. It's like they're accidentally turning their podcast into a language learning tool.
I know. It's really cool.
I love that they're always experimenting
Yeah.
and finding new ways to improve the experience.
Yeah.
What other kinds of creative approaches have they taken?
Well, they've also been experimenting with different reading styles to see what works best for their listeners.
Oh, cool.
So sometimes it's one person reading.
Okay.
Sometimes it's different members taking on certain roles,
Oh, cool.
like characters in a play
Yeah.
or the narration. So they're always trying to find the right balance between clarity and keeping people engaged and being authentic to the text.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's clear they're not just going through the motion. They're really passionate about making their content the best it can be.
They're really dedicated.
And it sounds like they're not just interested in just putting their stuff out there.
No,
They're really interested in building a community around it.
they are. They have a really strong presence on Clubhouse,
Oh, cool.
where they host live reading sessions every Friday.
Oh, wow. So people can actually call in.
Yeah, it's a chance for people to connect,
Yeah.
practice their Shanghainese,
Yeah.
and they can even participate in the readings themselves.
So it's fully interactive.
Yeah, it's not just listening.
That's so cool.
It's about being actively involved.
What other ways are they connecting with listeners?
Well, they also use messaging platforms like WeChat and Telegram
Okay.
to have discussions and connect with listeners
Yeah.
outside of the podcast itself.
I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, it's a good way to build community and a shared sense of purpose among all their followers.
It's really inspiring to see how they've created this whole thriving community.
Mm-hmm.
online
Yeah.
around something as specific as Shanghainese literature.
Yeah. It really shows how powerful passion and technology can be
Right.
when it comes to bringing people together and
Yeah.
keeping these traditions alive.
But before we get into that, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to talk more about the impact of the Wu Language Podcast and what it means for the future of Shanghainese. We're back and ready to keep diving into the world of the Wu Language Podcast. Before the break,
Yeah.
we were talking about all the different ways they're connecting with people online.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of something you said earlier
Right.
about how this whole project, even though it's about a very specific dialect, it speaks to a more kind of universal experience.
It does, yeah. It might seem like a really niche interest at first.
Right.
Like who's out there listening to a podcast about Shanghainese literature?
Yeah.
But the more you think about it, the more you realize that this dedication.
To preserving a language
Mm-hmm.
and a cultural heritage, it really resonates with anyone who values their own roots,
It does.
like whether we're talking about Shanghainese or Gaelic or any other language
Yes, exactly.
that's facing endangerment.
Yeah.
The message is the same. Language is so important to who we are,
Yeah.
both individually and collectively, and it's worth fighting for.
And what's really inspiring about the Wu Language Podcast
Yeah.
is that they're not approaching this from, a purely academic perspective
Right.
or like they're just trying to preserve something in a museum.
Right.
They're making Shanghainese accessible and relatable.
Yeah, and fun.
And fun, exactly, for a new generation.
They're bringing these stories to life.
They are, yeah.
And by doing that, they're inviting all of us to connect with a different culture, a different time period,
Right.
and a different way of using language.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it so interesting.
I agree. It's a really good reminder that diversity in all its forms
Yeah,
really does enrich our lives. And it broadens our understanding of the world.
for sure.
And that's a message that, deserves to be shared more widely.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little more about the Sing Song Girls of Shanghai,
Yeah.
this 19th century novel that they've chosen to work on.
Yeah, it's not just some random old book.
No, it's not.
It's actually really fascinating.
Yeah.
It gives us a glimpse into a time of huge change in Chinese history.
Okay.
So the late Qing dynasty was a period of, a lot of upheaval,
Right.
and Shanghai was right in the middle of it all. And this novel really captures that.
Yeah.
It paints this picture of the lives of these courtesans, their patrons, and the whole complex social world
Right.
of that time period.
And it's all written in this Wu dialect, which just adds another layer to it, right?
It does. It's like we're overhearing conversations from
Mhm.
back then
Yeah.
and getting a taste of what Shanghainese language and culture was
Yeah.
really like.
It's a real linguistic time capsule.
It is.
And it's so cool that they're bringing it to life for modern audiences.
It is, yeah.
It shows how language can connect us to the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really interesting how they're combining this deep respect for tradition with this real spirit of innovation.
Yeah, it's not just about preserving the past.
Right.
It's about finding new ways to
Yeah.
make it relevant for today.
Exactly. They're not just clinging to tradition.
Yeah,
They're using it to
Yeah.
be creative.
to be creative and innovative.
And that's a lesson we can all apply to our own lives,
It is, yeah.
no matter what our background or interests are.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of the Wu Language Podcast,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought.
Okay.
Imagine a world where every endangered language had a dedicated group of people like this,
Right.
who are passionate about sharing it with everyone.
That would be amazing.
What kind of impact would that have on our world?
That's a beautiful thought.
Yeah,
It would be a world that's so much richer and more diverse,
absolutely.
full of understanding and connection.
Yeah,
It's really inspiring to think about.
it is. And it might seem like a really ambitious goal,
Yeah.
but the Wu Language Podcast proves that it's possible.
Right.
With enough passion and ingenuity and collaboration,
Yeah.
we can all do our part to keep these languages alive.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there,
Yeah.
I encourage you to go check out the Wu Language Podcast.
Yeah. Give it a listen.
Connect with their community, and maybe even think about how you can support their efforts.
Yeah.
You might just find a new passion for Shanghainese literature.
You might.
Or maybe you'll be inspired to find a way to contribute to preserving your own linguistic heritage.
That's a great point.
Every language has a story to tell,
It does.
a story of history, culture, and human connection.
Yeah.
And those stories deserve to be heard.
They do.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Wu Language Podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about this group of people out there
Yeah.
coming together to read these 19th century Shanghainese novels aloud.
Yeah.
It's not just about preserving a language, it's creating a whole global community.
It really is, and they do it with so much passion and creativity, you know. It's easy to think of language preservation as something, I don't know, kind of boring and academic, like
Right.
putting stuff in a museum, but the Language podcast shows us that language is alive. It's
Right.
meant to be used and shared.
Yeah, it's like music.
It is.
You know, you don't always need to understand the lyrics to appreciate a song.
Exactly.
And in a similar way, we don't need to speak Shanghainese
Right.
to connect with the stories
Yeah.
and the rhythm
Yeah, the passion.
that comes through in their reading.
It's about appreciating the value of having all these different languages.
Yeah,
Every language has a unique way of seeing the world
right.
and its own set of stories.
And when a language fades away,
Yeah.
we lose all of that.
We do.
And that makes me think about technology.
Okay.
You know, on one hand, the internet can be a threat to smaller languages
Right.
because bigger languages tend to dominate online.
Yeah.
But we've also seen that technology can be used to revitalize languages.
Exactly. Like in this case,
Yeah.
this group is connecting people from all over the world
Yeah.
and bringing them together around Shanghainese.
It really shows how the internet can break down barriers
It does.
and help build communities.
Yeah. And it's not just about connecting with people who already speak the language.
Right.
It's also about introducing it to new people.
Yes. And maybe someone listening to this will be inspired to learn Shanghainese.
I hope so.
And even if they don't,
Yeah.
I hope this deep dive has at least made them appreciate
Yeah.
the importance of linguistic diversity.
I think that's a great point to wrap things up on.
Yeah, I think so too.
We've had a great discussion about the Wu Language podcast,
We have.
their creative approach to keeping Shanghainese alive.
Yeah. And what we can all learn from them.
So I'll leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
What other amazing projects are out there? What other communities are working to keep their languages and cultures alive? Go out and explore.
Yeah. Listen to those voices that are often overlooked
Exactly.
and appreciate the incredible tapestry of human expression that we have in our world.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that's sure to pique your interest. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those ears open to the diverse voices that make our world so rich and vibrant.